Okay, hi everybody. This is the monthly meeting of the Kubernetes VMware User Group. It looks like we've got myself, Miles, Gray as chairs, and there are user representatives. Joe and Bryson are here. I posted a link to our agenda doc in the chat window. If you could put your name on the attendee list. And Miles, I think you wanted to go through introductions because it looks like we have some newcomers here.
Yeah, sure. So as I was saying before we started the recording, we normally do this thing at the start of the user group where anyone that's new to the user group introduces themselves, you know, who you are, what you do, what you're interested in, and, you know, maybe what you want to get out of the user group, that kind of thing. So I'm going to pick on John because I work with John. So John, you're up first.
All right, my name is John Nicholson. I work with Miles on the VCN tech marketing team. To say my interests are learning more about CSI, integrations, and just Kubernetes in general.
Are you a good guy in spite of the black hat?
I normally wear a white shirt with it, so you know it's a little of both.
All right, cool. Thanks, John. Ron.
Thanks, Miles. Ron Singler. I work with John and Miles as well. Chief Technologist at VMware. My interests are just learning more about CSI and just learning more about Kubernetes and all the integrations in general.
Cool. Thanks, Ron. Yassine.
Hi everyone, I'm Yassine. I work at VMware and I am mainly working on cluster API for vSphere. I also work on the SIG cloud provider for the cloud provider integration.
Cool, thank you. Joe, I don't recall Joe being here last time.
Joe Mann,
sorry,
to be specific.
Joe Mann, right, yeah, sorry. Oh, his mic's busted. Okay, Mo, let's go with you.
Hey, so I work at VMware on TKG. I just saw a meeting link, so I was like, yeah, I'll join this meeting. I also I work upstream. I'm one of the co-chairs for SIG-Auth. So yeah, Authy stuff is what I do.
Cool. Thank you, Mo. Brandon Wilmont, to be specific again.
Hey, Miles. Thanks for having the link out there. I think I just saw someone tweeted. So glad I had the opportunity to join. I'm a SE for vSAN and global accounts at VMware. Glad to be here.
Cool, thank you. And Brandon Graves this time. Or he's actually just mute by default. That's okay. Joe, if your mic is not busted.
Yeah, thanks about that. Thanks, Miles. So Joe Mann, I am a staff cloud solution architect at VMware. I support the global cloud provider program with a focus on the modern application product portfolio at VMware. Been working with CAPV over the last couple of months, and specifically interested in learning a little bit more about the shift from V1 Alpha 2 to V1 Alpha 3 and what that means for kind of the provisioning and management workflow of CAPV.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Joe. And just in time for his intro, Nadir, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi there. Hi. So I'm Nadir. I've been working on Cluster API for the last probably 18 months or so. So I've been working on an AWS provider for a long while. I'm going to be doing a lot more with vSphere shortly.
Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. I think that's everyone covered. If you haven't, just
Andrew actually wasn't in the last meeting, although he's been a regular on the old legacy VMware SIG. Andrew?
Yeah, hey. I think I was here last meeting.
But, okay. You didn't get your name in the attendee list, so that's why I thought you weren't. Okay.
Okay, cool.
Thanks.
All right.
And then Miles and I are the co-chairs, and then our inaugural user sponsors are Bryson Shepard of Walmart and Joe Searcy of T-Mobile.
Cool. And I've just seen Mike Foley join as well. So Mike, we're all doing introductions, you know, who you are, what you do, why you're interested in the meeting, that kind of stuff. So do you want to do like a brief intro?
Yeah, my name is Mike Foley. I work on the vSphere team. I've recently moved from vSphere security into the Project Pacific vSphere with Kubernetes world, and rapidly trying to come up to speed on as much of this as possible. Just finished writing the Kubernetes for the vSphere admin 101 guide. And yeah, so I'm in drinking from the fire hose mode.
Cool, nice. All right, I think that's everyone. So,
so the first agenda item was that just in case people weren't aware of it, we were looking forward to having a user group face-to-face at KubeCon Europe later this month, but the CNCF canceled it because of coronavirus. They didn't cancel it, it's tentatively delayed until July or August is the current suggestion. And I put a link in the agenda notes document if you want to learn more about that. One thing I did want to reach out, Robert from Amsterdam, I think you're on, and I just wanted to check whether, I know I and some others RSVP'd for the vBeers face-to-face social event at KubeCon. Are you okay with just presuming that we have canceled even if we put in an RSVP? Or I suppose you locals could have that event anyway if you wanted to, but I just wanted to check.
Yeah, I sent out an email today asking people to cancel if they could, just so it's clear if there's anyone left who's coming. I know there are a few people local in Amsterdam, so I'm still having it happen.
Okay.
But if you could cancel your invite, that would be helpful, but it's not that important.
Okay, and yeah, and so we look forward to it being tentatively July, August, but I think that's up to the CNCF and we'll just have to see. Let's move on then to Cluster API. So Yassine is with us, but just in case there are people on the call who aren't familiar with the concept of the Cluster API, this is an upstream project within Kubernetes managed by the Cluster Lifecycle SIG. And the goal of the Cluster API is to implement a declarative, meaning a Kubernetes style API where you state desired goals that allows you to provision the infrastructure that would run your Kubernetes clusters. It's not a cloud provider abstraction, that still exists, but this does not replace it. However, there is a plugin called a Cluster API Infrastructure Provider that does adapt it to whatever it's managing. And what we're going to talk about today is using Cluster API to deploy Kubernetes clusters specifically on vSphere. But Cluster API as a concept is targeted at working with deployment tools like kubeadm to deploy Kubernetes to any target, you know, whether it be vSphere, AWS, Azure, you know, whatever public cloud. And with that said, as an intro, oh, and I did post a link to a deep dive deck on Cluster API that was presented at KubeCon in November 2019. So it's reasonably fresh if you want to go into the details, but I'll turn it over to Yassine to specifically cover Cluster API as it relates to vSphere infrastructure.
Thanks. So for the last cycle, we've been working on CAPV to move it to V1 Alpha 3. So hold on, let me share my screen. Can you all see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we can. Thanks.
So CAPV basically helps you manage Kubernetes clusters on top of vSphere using the Kubernetes API style. So I have a quick demo that I can show you later, but I wanted first to go on the walkthrough and like the bare requirement to run CAPV on your vSphere installation. So for the information that we need for CAPV, we obviously need the credential that you're going to use for your setup. We're gonna need an endpoint, a vCenter endpoint. We're gonna also need some specific information such as the data center, the data store networks, the resource pool where we're gonna land the VMs, the template that we're gonna use to create machines out of it, and a template for what we're calling the HA proxy load balancer, which is basically VMs that hosts HA proxy instances that are going to load balance traffic to the API server. And finally, an SSH key that will help you to access the machines once they're provisioned. So with that, I have a quick recording that I made today. So first thing that you'll need is what we call a kind. Might need to refresh this. So yeah, as I said, first thing that you'll need is what we call kind, which is Kubernetes in Docker. Kubernetes in Docker helps you to create Kubernetes clusters with nodes that are Docker containers. So first thing is you create the kind cluster. I'm gonna move a bit. So once you create the kind cluster, we have a command, a CLI, which is cluster curl. Cluster curl has a command which is init that helps you install all of the provider components into the kind cluster. So it's gonna install basically all of the controllers of cluster API and cluster API for vSphere. So
if you don't mind, in case anybody is a total newbie, the purpose of this kind cluster is to bootstrap this up, right?
Yeah. So as you said, yeah, the kind cluster is for bootstrapping. Basically, you'd need to have a Kubernetes cluster where you'll install all of the controllers that are going to reconcile the CRDs, so that are clusters, machines, and whatnot. So this is going to be used specifically for bootstrapping. So once we specify the versions we want for cluster API and for CAPV, which is -- infrastructure, cluster curl is going to fetch all of the providers and install them directly to your kind cluster. So it's going to fetch things like cert manager, since we're using it for certs and for managing webhooks certs. It's going to install all of the CRDs and all of the deployments that hosts the controllers. So with that, so once it's installed, it's gonna prompt you the first command that you want to use, which is cluster curl config cluster. This basically fetch a YAML file that we publish usually at each release. So if I go to the CAPV repo and I go to a release, we publish some assets. One of the assets that we publish is the cluster template. So if I open this, so basically the cluster template looks like this, which is a bunch of YAML, which represents things like cluster, the HA proxy load balancer, the vSphere cluster, and all of the info that are needed to bootstrap the cluster. And as you see, everything is like using variables. So cluster curl, once you're going to use this YAML with cluster curl is going to automatically replace these with specific values. So these values actually come from a specific place. If I go to the getting started, you have to create a file under .cluster API clustercode.yaml, and these values are going to actually be used to replace everything on the template that we publish with the assets of each release. So if I go here and I use the command clustercall config cluster with the infrastructure vSphere and add in some overrides, for example, the Kubernetes version, the control plane count, and redirect this to a file. If I open the file, sorry, my connection is a bit laggy. Let me refresh this. So it seems like something is off with the recording. That's fine, I can show you the live version. So if I do something like this,
can you make that bigger, you see?
yeah. Is it good?
Yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, you're gonna see that things that were using variables were substituted, such as the network name, the server, the template that we're gonna use, and whatnot. So this was an old template. I'm gonna see if okay. Oh, okay. And so I deleted everything. Let's see if the recording wants to kick off again. Okay. Yeah, that's definitely an issue with the recording. I'm gonna see if I can make it work here. Meanwhile, I'm gonna let this run. So first, yeah, creating the kind cluster, then after that, doing the init.
Eugene, could you talk a bit about the different templates that are available, and how are those created? Like, say, I want to use a specific Kubernetes version. There's images that you need to be able to use, right?
So for the template, currently we are publishing only one, to be specific. We were tempted at some point to publish a second flavor. So flavors means that, yeah, for cluster call, we have the notion of flavors. Flavors are basically different workload cluster templates. So if you have, let's say, a load balancing solution based on HA proxy, you'll have a flavor that is HA proxy. And if you are for example, on you have added a controller that creates, I don't know, another load balancing solution, such, for example, as AWS ELB, you'll have another flavor. So for now, we have only one. And the second one that we were tempted to provide is, instead of using the new kubeadm control plane CRD, we were planning to add a second flavor, which was called which is basically not based on kubeadm control plane, but just kubeadm config. The difference is that when you use a kubeadm config, you need to provide a machine too. So we didn't want to provide this because it'll mean that you're gonna run on some issues such as how do you upgrade your cluster? How do you do health checks? So this is one of the reasons that we didn't want to provide another flavor. But I think that in the future, but probably we're gonna provide some other load balancing solution other than HA proxy. So so for this, yeah, we're gonna provide other templates based on, for example, NSXT. If you're talking also about VM templates, you can definitely use other ones. So if I go to the README, we have currently supported CentOS 7, Ubuntu, and Photon. So the community is providing through the image builder these three, and we are constantly updating the versions so that you can ship the latest Kubernetes version. So currently we have 1.17, and once 1.18 is out, we're gonna add it too.
Yeah, so if you want to build your own images, there's a separate project called Image Builder. So if you just swap that for Image Build, and that is a bunch of Packer and Ansible scripts to build your own images, and you can build your OVA template to that. So when you specify Kubernetes version, you need to have a OVA uploaded into your vCenter with the match, and they need to match. So in the future, we're thinking of writing an automated controller that will be able to download that. So you can just specify the version and it will reconciliate whether or not you have that OVA uploaded in vCenter and make sure it's there. But at present, you need to upload a version and OVA into your vCenter for each Kubernetes version that you want to deploy.
Yeah, and like if we go to the getting started, this is specifically the path for your template. So you have to specify one for your machines, for the Kubernetes nodes and for your control plane, and one for another template for the HA proxy load balancer. So if I do,
there's two templates. Did I hear that, or did I misunderstand that last part?
Yes. So in V1 Alpha 3, so in this new version of Cluster API, we have a concept of, we do stateful control plane management. One of the requirements is that there's a stable IP address, or not a stable IP address, a stable endpoint. So that essentially requires some sort of load balancer situation.
Right. So you have a
so
separate OVA.
We've experimentally created a HA proxy load balancer for which we have provided a template. I believe the scripts for that are in the hack directory at the moment. We need to find a final resting home over time, but for now, yeah, we provide one upstream image. You are able to build your own, and you need that. You will if you want to make use of a stateful high availability control plane, you need to use the HA proxy as well.
What size is the OVA for the Ubuntu template? Is it like, I'm curious what you have on there for?
So I don't recall specifically the size, but hold on, let me check.
It's about 1.3 gigs.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so now that,
Yassine,
yep.
Just a quick question. So I'm looking at the back in the cluster init command. I'm trying to, like I said initially, trying to understand the change between Alpha 2 and Alpha 3. These core bootstrap control plane infrastructure flags that you're defining, where are those file names locally on your machine, and how are those generated and defined?
So these are fetched from the GitHub repos. So dash core specifies the provider that the cluster API upstream. So this specifies the version, and if I go to so if I go here, it's gonna go and fetch specifically this file. So this is the file that is going to be fetched. So cluster call is fetching the core components, which contains, if I open this, it's gonna contain all of the namespace definitions, the CRDs, deployment webhooks. So it's gonna fetch this and install it for you.
So you say the origin is GitHub, but suppose you're trying to deploy a cluster in your air gap. Is there a procedure for doing that?
So yes, we have, there's this, well, last time I used this, it was a script that is called, under hack, it's called override.py. Basically, it overrides the files that you want to use, and it's gonna, basically, if you drop a file under the cluster API directory, so if you drop a file under, for example, let's say vSphere, and you drop the components file here, it's gonna fetch it from here.
Okay, great.
So this was originally used since when we were developing V1 Alpha 3, since there was no published version yet with V1 Alpha 3. So this allows you to use CAPV or any provider with CAPV without having to fetch the resources upstream.
And okay, so the follow-on question, in the init command, or where is cluster CTL pulling like the vSphere environment credentials from to install within the management cluster?
So do you mean where do we specify the credentials of vCenter?
Exactly.
Okay, so this is going to be, here I can show it. On the getting started, this specific YAML file has to go under .cluster API cluster call.yaml. So the credentials are going to live here. Also the vCenter endpoint too.
Got it. Great. Thank you.
And you can use environment variables as well. So it's your choice. Environment variables or use that file. It's just probably you're better off using that YAML file for credentials so you don't have it in your bash history.
Sure.
So there's a gotcha that you'll need to be aware of. Currently, if Nadir, correct me if I'm mistaken, but currently cluster call do not allow having empty variables. So for example, if you don't want to specify an SSH authorized key, you'll end up with an error. So you need to specify some value here.
Is there a way to use some sort of secrets manager or something to keep that from just sitting in a file in that working directory? Or?
So I would say that you can manage this file any way you want, as long as it is in this specific path when you are doing the init command.
I gather
Yeah.
what you're getting at, John, is some mechanism to have it encrypted at rest.
Yeah.
One thing you might want to do, so because Cluster Castle supports environment variable, so as a moment ago I said don't do that because it's in your bash history. But if you're using something like pass, you could have the environment variable set as a output of a command that fetches it from encrypted at rest source, temporarily makes it available as an environment variable prior to execution of Cluster Castle. So there's probably different ways you could script this. So if you were doing it as a pipeline, that would be one way to do it.
Yep, and we've done testing with basically using CI/CD pipeline to do this dynamically reading from Vault to do just that.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, you can handle it like there's multiple ways to do it, but as long as the file is there, you should be good to go. So with that, let's see. I can go back. I'll do it live too, since.
Pardon me for asking, what are you guys SSHing into vCenter for?
So the SSH key that we provide here is going to allow you to SSH into the machines that CAPV is going to provision. So if you want to go and grab logs from the Kubernetes nodes, or
So it's not vSphere into the SXI host, it's vSphere into VMs that are running your Kubernetes cluster or management control plane.
It's for users. So Cluster API has no need to SSH into a machine. So it's purely a break glass mechanism for operators to get into the machines if they need to. We've included this in the template, but if people don't want it, there's a case to be made that we don't put it in the default template at all. We just think that most sort of quick start type users probably do want to SSH into their nodes at some point. So we put that into the default template.
This isn't for SSHing into vCenter.
Definitely not.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Nadir, but essentially with the cluster API construct, there's like a cloud init profile that gets created by the bootstrap provider and the infrastructure provider when it goes to create an actual node for either the control plane or for the worker node. And it injects that SSH key in there so that you have a way to SSH into either your control plane or worker nodes that are generated for using cluster
Precisely.
API.
Yeah. And for instance, on the AWS provider, we've taken the decision to remove the ability to SSH if you so wish, and that will probably be the default. So we might do that. You can always customize the output of the cluster cutter, whatever cluster cutter creates. You can always customize the output before you apply it to the either the kind cluster or whatever, what we call a management cluster where these objects end up.
So when you apply the YAML that was templated, the first thing that you'll do is, for example, you get the machines and they're going to show up as pending. So these are the worker machines that are generated by the machine deployment. If I get the kubeadm control plane, I'm going to find that there is a kubeadm control plane that was applied with all of the values that were templated, such as the SSH key. So I think one of the things that I might show you, since I am going to apply the YAML anyway here. Oops. So if I
Yassine, can you talk a little bit about the different CRDs, like the difference between machine template, control plane, config template? You know, what are the different bits and pieces do, or why are they there?
if I do get CRDs, so I'm going to talk about the. I'll start with the CAPI ones, then I'll go to the vSpheres or CAPV specific ones. So the first one is the cluster. If I do get cluster, so you can see how it looks like. So cluster is a generic resource that is going to host some generic informations that are going to be true for every provider. So for every provider, it's going to need a pod CIDR. It's going to need a reference to to a control plane. It's going to need a reference to also to an infrastructure resource that is going to host specific informations about the providers, such as, you know, the vCenter endpoint, the credential, all of the bits of configuration that are specific to your provider. So
what's the maturity of the docs? Is there a place in the docs that gathers all of these requirements like the CIDR up front so that you know what to do and prep for doing a deployment like this?
So I would say that it's easy. With cluster.cl config, we provided an easy button experience. So you can not worry about fetching all of these informations. But if you want to, you know, if you want to construct your own workload cluster template, I would say that the CAPI book is the right place to start. I don't know if Nadir, do you know if it was updated for V1 Alpha 3?
Yes and no, but I don't, to be honest, I think that it's safe to say the options have not been well documented in terms of beyond looking at the description in the CRD for any of the providers. We probably could do a better job across the board on that. Yeah.
So I would, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that a lot of the configuration around specifics of cluster bootstrapping, the bootstrap provider, which I think the primary end use today is kubeadm. If you have any existing experience with making kubeadm configurations and whatnot, the majority of those configurations options, if not the entirety of them, are exposed or available here. So customizing, your kubelet configuration and your pod CIDR, server CIDR, stuff like that it should be very similar. But yeah, definitely a few gaps in the documentation.
So yeah, if I show an example of kubeadm config, you should be able to, I would say, extensively change the spec here, because since we're using the kubeadm types, so there's no reason to that you wouldn't be able to reuse any configuration that you've had previously with kubeadm and that you were using. So with that, I can show, I'll talk a bit about the other resources that I'll get back to the demo. So for the cluster, as I said, we had a cluster which is provided by CAPI. We have machine deployments, which is basically based on the same concept as the Kubernetes deployment. We have machine sets for replica sets, and we have machines that matches the concept for pods. So these are the main CRDs that you interact with, like in addition to the KubeADM config that hosts, all of the KubeADM configuration, and the KubeADM control plane that involves, the life cycle of your control plane. So if I show KubeADM, what it has is the it's mainly the same thing as a KubeADM config, but it has the replicas that you want in terms of control plane, and it has the version of your control plane that you want. So there's a gotcha in terms of validation, since if you want to use HA, you want to use something like 1 replica for non-HA, or 3, for example, if you want to use an HA environment. So we have like CAPV provides validating webhooks in such a way that if you specify a replica set to 2, it's going to reject your request anyway. So with let's see if we started to get any machines up. I think my connection is laggy, so I'm gonna mostly rely on the demo that I recorded. So we have on v1 alpha 3 something that is called a vSphere VM. So a vSphere VM is a construct that hosts all of the information to create a virtual machine. It's not something that is going to be a Kubernetes node. It can be just a VM to create HA proxy. So we introduced this specifically to be able to manage easily HA proxy VMs. So this is something that is automatically generated, and you won't have to create it by yourself, but it's always nice to know that it exists. So when you create, if I go here.
By the way, Yassine, I'm going to give you like a 10-minute warning because I think Andrew wanted to give a little bit at the end.
Okay, so let's see if I can move. So yeah, as I said, the main changes for this version is the introduction of HA proxy as a load balancing solution plus v1 alpha 3. So once you get a hand around, a hold around these specific changes, there are no major updates in terms of the way CAPV operates from v1 alpha 2 to v1 alpha 3. So except the changes of the control plane endpoint and this, you should be good to go. I think another thing that we need to mention is that we still we plan to provide for the community a document that outlines the things that you'll want to do to move from a CAPV cluster that was bootstrapped under v1 alpha 2 to CRDs that are v1 alpha 3. So this is gonna come a bit later after the final release.
Is that HA proxy as your load balancer a hard requirement, or
so
could you use an alternate, or would you even want to?
So with the template that we are providing, it is already baked in, but if you are constructing your own, you can always specify, hold on, let me, if I show, for example, a vSphere machine. So here under network, if you don't want to use HA proxy, you can always set static IPs for your machines. So under network, you can say DHCP false and then specify your IP. So this would allow you to know in advance your IPs, and you could, you know, add something like NSX-T in front, so you can use it as a load balancing solution. So for now, we provide only for a solution for HA proxy, but for the next release, we are definitely providing one for NSX.
So question on that. Are you only setting up by default one HA proxy VM, or are you doing 2 of those?
So by default, we are having only one VM, but there's the plan to add replicas for HA proxy and support HA proxy failover.
Okay, what's
Another
your
thing to add is this HA proxy work is a sort of experiment that we're doing in cluster API around load balancers. So we, in the vSphere cluster, we actually have something called a load balancer reference. Now, it could reference a different implementation. So I was speaking to some people at Cloud Native London yesterday, and there's a lot of people there want something that's more like a VIP-based solution, so something like Keeper ID. There's nothing to stop people from writing that implementation and using that in its stead. It's just we've done an initial experiment with HA proxy. So we'll probably add, it will get better, and we'll probably add different solutions as time goes on.
Yeah, I'm curious. I would think you could possibly put those together and have like Keep Alive D, you know, point to your HA proxy nodes.
Yeah, yeah, probably.
So yeah, just to wrap up, I'll just go further on the demo. So once you get your first control plane node that has a provider ID and that is in a running state, the other machine deployments, generated machines, are going to start and provision. So this way we ensure that the workers are going to join once the init is completed. So we'll have all of the machines that are going to be in a provisioned state. Then if I move a bit further, we are going to end up with successful joins, and you can have then access to your cluster through actually a secret that is going to be created for you. And sorry for the laggy connection. I think my ISP is doing some work around me, so I've been lagging for the whole day. Anyway, yeah. So the secret is going to be created in the namespace you created your workload cluster in. So it's gonna be like once it's created, you can retrieve it and access your workload cluster. So this shows this shows the kube config, and once you can access your cluster, the next thing that you'll want to do is apply the add-ons so you can get the network up and running. With that, you'll have a cluster that is running. So if you have any question around V1 Alpha 3 or anything else, just ping me on Slack. Nadir is there too. So we have a bunch of folks that actually started testing it. So yeah, feel free to reach out there. So with that, I'll stop sharing. And if you have any question.
So for those questions pinging you on Slack, we have under the Kubernetes Slack, the VMware User Group channel. So ping you there is fine.
So usually all of the community and the users hang out under cluster API provider vSphere.
Okay. Okay, if there's no questions for you see now, Andrew, I think you had an item to cover.
I think there was one item before me by Robert.
Oh yeah, Robert is asking, can Mike post a link to his Kate's 101 for vSphere admins guide, if that's possible? Or if it hasn't been released yet.
Has not been released yet.
Okay.
It's more of a white paper than a guide.
Okay, yeah, I'll go ahead then. So the wonderful folks at SAP wanted to contribute to the vSphere cloud provider, and so they added the initial support for creating NXST load balancers in front of your Kubernetes clusters using the service API. So this is a pretty new feature. It merged early this week, and it's in alpha features. So we are looking for early feedback. If folks have a vSphere and NXST installation, we'd love for you to reach out and give it a try. And yeah, so I just wanted to put it out there to see if anyone was willing to try it. Please don't use it in production because it is alpha. And next week, or not next week, but the next user group meeting, I will try to prepare like a really quick 10-minute demo on how to use it and what it could do.
That'd be great. Maybe you can bring the SAP people who did it on too.
Yeah, I'll try to reach out. I think they're based in the EU, so the time zone might not be great, but I'll reach out.
Okay, I think that's it for the agenda. Does anybody have anything? And like I said, if it's too late to cover it now, please put it in there because we want these monthly meetings to be driven by whatever users want. And Miles and I maybe aren't the best to assess that.
Just one thing from me, for more so of like a potential future topic, is I know there's a lot of conversations and stuff going around on the integration of some of the Avi networks components into vSphere and the service mesh area, things around the like NSX service mesh stack. I think that'd be really cool to do as a potential topic for a future meeting.
Okay, so service mesh in...
Yeah, I think the product is currently called
Avi or NSX service mesh or others potentially, right?
Yeah.
I think under the ground rules, since this is a Kubernetes group, for us to bring it in here, that it does have to be open source, but I think that those may all qualify. Okay, if there are no other nominations, I'll call this to a close, but that agenda doc is open. I'll carry the service mesh ask over and put it on the agenda for next month's meeting, and we'll see who we can bring. Miles and I had a presentation planned for KubeCon Europe that will be about the time frame of the next one, so maybe if we need more content, the two of us will put together the deck we had planned for KubeCon and put it on here. So that's it. Thanks for coming and see you in a month.